Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Christy Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman, and Kai the Wonder Dog. And pardon me for having the sniffles today. I'm feeling a little under the weather, but I wanted to come on and record for everyone that listens to you. So today we're going to talk about moving through grief and finding your own pathway through. And I came up with this topic before last night. And I noticed after last week's episode that I had many people unsubscribing from my Instagram and from my podcast show. And it was really disappointing because the one place that we don't need judgment is in grief, right? And I know it happens. I know that it's part of social media, but it was really disappointing. And so I just want to say this about it, is that Grieving Insomniacs is an inclusive environment. That means that we include all cultures, all religions, and we're accepting of everyone on my podcast. So if you have a particular belief system and can't be open to other belief systems, maybe my podcast is not the one for you. And so I don't know if I need to put that as a disclaimer on every episode or and on my Instagram. See, grief happens to everyone. It happens in every culture, every ethnicity, every religion. And there is different pathways for each individual person through that. And we get enough judgment from the outside world, right? We get people that tell us that we should move on. We get people that tell us you've grieved long enough. I even had somebody tell me last week when I was talking about grief, just in casual conversation, well, that grief is not as significant as this other grief. And that's actually not true. That is so not true, because the person that is experiencing the grief gets to determine the depth of their grief. And they get to grieve any way they want to. And so we have to protect our grieving community from judgment, even amongst each other. And that is how I felt when I put that story out there. I did feel judged, that I was no longer worthy listening to, because I put my own personal story out there. And they didn't agree with how I went about things, evidently. It'd just be nice sometimes when people do that they tell you why, but I have a general idea why. Some people just don't believe in the same things I do, but you don't have to in order to find community in grief. We're all different. And so, having said that, let's talk about finding your pathway through grief. So the thing is, I found this quote, and I've used it over and over and over for the past 11 years, because one thing about grief is you get tired. I remember the first year and talking to my therapist and saying, isn't it over yet? Like, when is this over? And he said, well, the second year is actually worse. I'm like, oh, because you've gone through all the first, and then your expectation is that it'll be better. And I'm an optimist. At heart, I'm an optimist, or I was. Grief changes you in a way. So then the second year comes along and you're like, okay, how come this hurts as bad as the first year? And then you get to the third year and it seems like it's even worse than the first year was. And so you get tired. And so I used this quote when I got tired. And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. And that's what the storm is all about. And the person that said this quote is Hanako Murakami. So it's, I want to give credit where credit is due. So it's Haruki, and the last name's Murchomi. And one thing for sure is that grief is a storm. And the problem with it is that there's no shelter from the storm. There may be days that the storm lessens and it doesn't feel like you're getting pelted with hailstones. And then there's other times when, you're right in the middle of the thunder and the lightning of it. And so what we have to do for each other is help each other find shelter, whether it's in community, whether it's in sharing stories. And please, please don't judge other people for how they're coping with their grief. Like if there's one thing that I could do to change the world, it would be that, is to not judge other people. Because we haven't experienced what they have experienced. We only know what we have experienced. And grief is heavily influenced by what you've experienced previously to the death of your loved one. And so what do I mean about pathways? So what I mean is that you can reach out to a therapist. You can reach out to a life coach. You can go to support groups. But at the end of the day, it's you trying to find your way through the storm. What pathway are you going to use to get through the storm? And bless their hearts for the people that think they found the pathway. But don't be disappointed if that pathway doesn't work for you, because it is so individualized. And I've come to realize that grief isn't over. Every year, every new experiences, there's nuances to the grief. And I also feel like the grief ages, right? So my grief is 11 years old, and I compare that to the developmental period of human beings, and 11-year-old children are still very literal. They can't think in the abstract. And I think that's very true when it comes to at least me and my grief, is that I'm still very literal about it. And what I mean by that is that I still miss Chris a lot. And I still think about him every day. And I know that there's some people that find like a lot of comfort in their religious practices or their religious beliefs, and that's just not a pathway that has been comfortable for me. I'm not, and please don't unfriend me for saying that. I'm just telling you that it's different for every person, and you have to find your way. And just because my way is my way doesn't mean that it's the same way for you. For some people, that's very comforting for them. And so that's what I mean by exploring these different ways. And I highly recommend journaling. So I bought a new journal. It's called Healing Through Words that I'm currently working through. But in the very beginning, I journaled a lot. I journal, especially my dreams. And so one of the techniques that you can use for journaling is you need to write it out for a page and a half. Once you get past the page and a half, you bypass the logical mind and you go into the emotional mind. And that's where you need to go, is to get past the logical. Because what happens is we feel angry, right? We're angry at the powers that be. We're angry at the people that don't show up for us. We are angry at the people that maybe had caused or impacted the death of our loved one. We're just angry. But underneath that anger, there's other things. We have to bypass the emotional, get past the conscious to get into the unconscious to figure out what's underneath there. And anger is like a poison. You got to get it out of your system. It stays in there and it festers and it festers. And anger can manifest in back pain. And I think that's the piece that people don't understand, is that emotional pain translates into physical pain. You might find yourself having a lot of headaches, a lot of muscle aches because you are really tense. So you could try journaling. And that's what I want to encourage on this episode of Grieving Insomniacs, is helping you find your way. But I think the most critical point that you need to understand is that you will be alone on this journey. Because I see so many people getting frustrated that this person didn't show up for them and this person didn't show up for them. And I have those same frustrations. Don't get me wrong, I have those same frustrations. But early on in my grief, I realized that I'm the one on the journey. I'm the one in the storm. And someone can walk through the storm with me, but I may not see them. I may not see how they show up for me. I may not see the support they're giving me because I'm so hyper focused on getting through the storm or getting through my grief. And I remember it was like that very much in the beginning. I became very self-absorbed into my pain. I really couldn't see the pain of other people. In fact, I thought they weren't grieving. I remember distinctly having a conversation with my husband and just being so mad at him. And he goes, he finally asked me, "Don't you think I lost a child too?" And I didn't. I honestly didn't. I thought it was all about me. It might have been because he was a stepfather, but I don't think so. I think that I was just so wrapped up in my pain of losing my son that I couldn't see other people. I couldn't see the way that they were supporting me. And so that's one of the things that I encourage people to think about is that you may not see the ways that other people are showing up for you until long after. Long after. And it's helpful to think of grief as a storm because it really feels like that sometimes. And you really feel alone. And I really did. Until I started this podcast, I and started to become much more active on Facebook. I really felt alone in my grief. I felt that like I was the only one that felt this way. And I felt like everybody else around me. I have Facebook friends that have lost children. Quite a few, actually. I think part of it's because of my age. I'm older. I'm in my 50s. And they appear to be handling it so much better. Even when I look on Instagram and I see people, there's a few real out there, But the majority of people, to me, seemed like they had it together. And I didn't have it together. I was looking for this magic pill, uh, this magic pill to make me feel better. I went to counseling, and he helped. Don't get me wrong, he helped. But there got to be a point where he was tired of it too. I'm sorry, Dr. Hill, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but I mean, I understand you get tired of hearing about it. I know my friends got tired of hearing about it. And that's another reason why I did the journaling. But most of the grief work was done alone by myself until I found this community, which might be one of the reasons why losing 10 people now from my podcast kind of hurt in a way. But it's social media, you know what happens. But I think that's the biggest thing, is that to understand moving through the storm, you're going to be alone. But here's the beauty about it, is that you don't have to explain to people. Like I choose to come on this podcast and I choose to put it all out there. But I do that because I believe that it is necessary. I believe it is necessary, and I believe it is you have to be real about this stuff, because every day there's people joining. Every day people are losing their children, and they're asking themselves, how am I going to survive this? They need the voices of all of us, the voices of the people that are more experienced than us, so that they can hear that it's survivable. But you're going to be different. You're going to be very much different. And I don't always like the person that I've become. I want you to know that I don't necessarily like the person that I've become. I am a lot less trusting of people. In fact, if I meet you, I am far more likely to view you with distrust than I am to trust you. And I used to be the total opposite. I was told once that I saw the world through rose-colored glasses. Well, them things are broke. They got all kinds of cracks and lines in them, because I don't see it that way anymore. I just see pain and loneliness. And so if you're on this pathway, the good thing, and I don't know if there's a good thing about being alone, but there's no judgment there, right? Like, you're inside your own head talking to yourself. There is nobody telling you that this is the wrong thing to do or this is the right thing to do. And some people need that. I understand that. But also, grieving alone teaches you to be independent and to have independent thoughts and to not depend on people. And that might be a bad thing, or it might be a good thing. I was a very dependent person before my son died. I can go into restaurants now all by myself. I can go to events now all by myself. I can do lots of things all by myself because I had to get used to being alone. And so I can do it. I know people that say they've never gone into a restaurant and had dinner by themselves. I do it all the time. Because people didn't want to be around me because I was grieving. And I talked about Christopher all the time. Now I don't. And I was thinking about that. So this is the part about choosing your pathway. So some people, my friend Judy, that you guys heard on the podcast, she talks about her daughter all the time to keep her daughter alive. She is, and her memory's real. That's the pathway she chose. I, on the other hand, have chosen a different pathway, which is my son is sacred. And I don't necessarily want him to share him with people that I don't deem worthy. And those are the people that judge you and say, aren't you over that yet? Or they don't want to listen to you. They didn't want to hear about how you missed your son today. My son's daughter was 12 years old on Friday. And I told one person at work. None of the others were interested. Not one of them. And she was only interested because she had lost a baby. And so, it's all about that community. I never told the others. So I don't talk about Christopher because I don't want to have hurt feelings. That's what it comes down to. Because I'm hurt when people don't acknowledge him. I am hurt when they don't acknowledge the pain that losing a child or my grief. It hurts me. And my way of coping with the hurt is to not talk about it. Trudy's way of dealing with the hurt is always talk about because she doesn't care. Because that's her way of coping. So that's what I mean by finding your pathway. Some people might find something in the middle. What they do with some people, they don't with the others. That's their pathway. That's how they cope. Other people have created memorials. That's their way of coping. Other people have, I saw there's Instagram Wolfie's Wish about a lady that's grieving her dog, and she has products that she creates that honors her dog. And I'm sure that there's people out there, I've seen them, that create pictures of people's loved ones in the hands of Jesus and other things like that. That's their pathway. That's how they discovered that they can cope with grief. So everybody has to find your own pathway. But what I would like to encourage you to do is try a bunch of different things until you find what works for you. And share that. If you'd like, share it in my comments, share it on my podcast. What does your heart desire to create this pathway for you through grief? And so mine has always been the podcast. Always been. Like I'm telling you, I say this all the time. I've said it multiple times on the podcast. And it's one of the reasons why I'm trying not to pay attention to the numbers. I knew in my heart the day that Christopher died that this needed to be done. And it was me that had to do it. I knew it. Cannot tell you. So I wrote my book. And that satisfied it for a little bit. Then I did the radio show in 2015. And I was still too scared. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have what I needed to internally because I was still on this journey and I was still alone and I was still afraid. I was afraid that people would judge me and that I would be found wanting or something that I said was not helpful. And so I didn't get the courage to do it until a year ago. But that's because I moved through the storm. And I'm not out of the storm yet. I am not out of the storm yet. I don't think I will ever be out of the storm. I will not be out of the storm until I am dead and with Christopher. And then my storm will end. But I have found places to shelter. The other brave people on Instagram that talk about their grief and make me feel less alone, I appreciate each and every one of you. I don't even know if you listen to the podcast. But for those of you that are out there real, I heart you very, very much. I find shelter in this podcast, knowing that people are helped by my words. Because that's all I ever wanted to do was help people. It's actually more fulfilling than being a therapist and kind of moving away from that realm. If I ever go back to having a private practice, it'll only be with grieving people. And I live in South Dakota. There's not very many people here. And so it's really hard to have such a small population of people because very few people that are grieving actually seek out a therapist, because I think it's so unfulfilling for them. And so it's hard to have a practice that has such a small number of people in it, at least in my area. And so one day, maybe, if they say you can have clients across the nation and they get all the licensing things figured out, I'll go back to private practice. But I have decided that I'm going to be exclusively grief, because this is where my heart is. And these are the people that I want to help. So that was a lot. I didn't think I had 30 minutes of content available today, but I do. So I encourage each of you to, and I know it's hard. So I started out by making a quilt for Christopher. I'd come home on Friday nights and I'd stay in my pajamas all day and I would make this quilt. And I don't know how to sew, but it helped me focus on him. And it's like my grief moved through my hands into the quilt. And the quilt is still not done. Remember, I don't know how to sew, but I still have it. So small steps to finding your pathway. Just small steps. And for those of you that are newly grieving, be easy on yourself. You'll find your pathway. I like quotes. I like books. I like art. All of those things at some point in my grief journey provided a means to express my grief. And I hope for you that you find the pathway that is right for you. This is Christy from Grieving Insomniacs. For all 37 of you that show up and listen to my podcast, I appreciate each and every one of you. You help my soul heal. I don't know if you know that. And so I just want to put it out there that I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for not judging me on my previous podcast. Thank you for the ones that hang around. You have a great week. And I'll see you next Sunday. Kaya and the Wonder Dog and myself, we are signing off.